Well, a senior administration administrator to former U.S. President Bush and head of the 9/11 Commission has described the CIA interrogation techniques used on alleged terrorists as torture.
Rob Pallitto from Seton Hall is a political science professor and is here now to discuss the Zellicow Memo. Good to have you here.
Good morning.
First of all, tell us a little bit about what this memo is for those who may not be following.
Well, Zellicow was a State Department lawyer in the Bush administration, and you may remember a couple of years ago, right after President Obama took office, he decided to release a series of memos relating to the legal standards of torture and about interrogation tactics used in the war on terror generally. Well, the Zellicow memo
that one was not released, though. It's taken 3 years, and it's just been released, though, correct?
Right, and one of the reasons is that the Bush administration collected and destroyed a number of copies of the memo, and so it was thought that no other copies existed, but recently one did surface.
Well, is that legal? What the Bush administration allegedly did?
Well, it's not illegal, but it does indicate sort of an unwillingness to look at advice that they were getting. I mean, the Bush administration had one clear idea of where they wanted to go with interrogation techniques, and when there were dissenting voices, they found various ways to shut them down.
Do you see any politics behind this? It's coming out now. It's in the middle of a big campaign election season. Democrats still are beating up on Bush for his prior 4 years. Do you see any political motivation for the release?
Well, there could be. It's kind of a complicated topic as well, because the president, as we know, can set standards for implementing policy that already exists. So we have a definition in U.S. law of what torture is and what cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment is, which is separate from torture, less than torture. And so President Obama, when he took office in 2009, said we're going to use a very restrictive standard as far as what U.S. interrogators can do. So now one way that the story could go is to say, well, here we have people within the Bush administration who said what you're doing violates the law, and the information was not only ignored but suppressed. So there is that sort of political angle to it.
The memo, in essence, pretty much tore apart the legal justification for waterboarding. Is that correct? Or for certain forms of interrogation or torture?
I think it did. Waterboarding, stress positions, which is making a person stand in exactly the same position for a long time, was also discussed in the memo. But here's the thing. One question is, what is torture? And the Bush administration lawyers gave a very narrow definition back in 2002 of what torture was. They basically said that torture, for one thing, was only conduct that led to severe pain. And they defined severe pain as consequences equal to organ failure, which is pretty extreme. But what Zellicow was saying is there's a separate legal standard that applies even if you don't think something is torture. It could still be prohibited if it amounts to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. So there's torture and there's something less than torture, which can also be prohibited. And Zellicow was saying, well, some of these things, even if you don't call them torture, which many people would, including myself, you can still find a reason to say that they're illegal. And the Bush administration disagreed with that point of view and tried to suppress it.
So this is one man's memo. Does the memo have larger implications in that, was this a war crime?
You know, it could perhaps. I mean, what it does to me is it suggests that it's even more clear the administration knew that they were crossing a legal line. But I think when the president...
But it was according just to this one memo. I mean, how much weight does this one memo have? The administration, I'm sure, would get many, many pieces of advice and memos. So, you know, give us some perspective on how much weight this memo held.
Well, I think one of the things is that you had someone saying pretty clearly within the administration, this is wrong, this is illegal, whereas before the critics were coming from outside the administration for the most part. But the other issue is that President Obama said pretty clearly that he was going to set a new standard going forward, but that he wasn't interested in seeking prosecution of officials from the previous administration. And that disappointed a lot of people, but I don't think that this revelation is going to change that approach.
Now, a lot of people might say the end justifies the means, that if they were able to get good information through dubious methods, it might be worth it in the long run. And that's part of the problem that all leaders in the Bush administration and the Obama administration and going forward will face, is how far do we go in this area that is sometimes ill-defined to get information that may save lives?
That's the key question. That's the tough question that happens at the policy level in discussing what we should do in terms of what we should use in terms of interrogation techniques. But I think what's really important about that question is if we get a new administration next year, they could issue a new executive order that says, well, the Bush administration did things one way, the Obama administration backed off from that, but we're going to go back to that, or we're going to go further. So that's the key thing, is that this is a matter of interpreting a legal standard, and each administration can make their own interpretation.
And the Obama administration, they decided not to go back, and they decided not to investigate, to prosecute, or to do anything, correct?
Well, to do anything in terms of seeking war crimes prosecutions or exacting some kind of punishment on past officials, I think their focus is on we're going to change policy now. So right after the inauguration, in fact, the president issued an executive order entitled Ensuring Lawful Interrogations. And he says that the standard that will be used, number one, is the Geneva Convention, and number two is something called the Army Field Manual, which, contrary to its name, is actually pretty restrictive. And it doesn't allow interrogators to use any kind of threats, violence, or coercion.
All right, Rob Pallitto, Seton Hall University, thank you so much for your insight into this issue.
Thank you.